We're going to take a look here at the motion modifier follower, which provides, as its name suggests, a simple following control, basically a constraint. In many ways this isn't too dissimilar from the same as item constraint, but does have a few particulars of its own. So for the sake of this example, I've got follower here on the camera and I'm just going to set it to follow the light. We see that much like same as item, I can switch channels if I want, so I can take any of the camera's input channels and take from the output of a different channel on the light. I can multiply the effect up or down, and I can add or subtract, of course, amounts to it. Those would be meter amounts in the positions and of course degree amounts in the rotation channels there, and of course multiplier amounts for the scaling. We see that like this, with default parameters x to x, heading to heading and so forth, we just have a very standard sort of constraint behavior, and that's great. Let's take a look at the world coordinates checkbox. Of course, both of these items are currently in the scene space. So what I will do is create a null there to be parent of the light and another null here to be parent of the camera. And we'll jump back into the follower here and turn on world coordinate. To start with, nothing changes because of course both of these nulls are at the origin, so it's as if the camera and light were still in the same space. So what we'll do is we'll first of all move the camera's null, and we see that the camera now comes away from the light. If we move the light, the camera still appears pinned to it, but it's been offset by its own parent null. What is going on in this situation is that it's the actual values of the light's world coordinates that are being applied to the camera's local space, or sorry, its parent space, its local coordinates, I mean. This is distinct from something like same as item, where of course the world mode makes an absolute match between the world position of one thing and the world position of another. Here we are getting the world coordinates. So if, for instance, I take my light and I'll just put him at 1 meter and 1 meter on the Y and Z channels, I will then put his parent null at -1, -1 on the Y and Z channels. That means in terms of world space, the light is at 0, 0, 0. And of course, if we look at our camera, we can see that he is at 0, 0, 0, relative of course to his own parent. It is the actual world values, the world coordinates, that are copied when we use world coordinates here in follower. Interestingly, the same is not true for the rotation, it is only for the position. So if I rotate the null that is a parent of the light, whilst the camera's position changes in accordance with the change in the light's world coordinate position, we can see that the camera's rotation has not changed. It still has the same values for rotation as the light's own local rotation values, and it only goes along with those in this fashion. So we see a couple of other options here in the panel. The after IK checkbox, of course, this motion modifier can be set to evaluate after IK rather than before it, so that allows us to put it on one side of the evaluation of other things on the motion options panel here, which can be handy from time to time. The other things that we have are time delay, path delay, randomize and align to path controls. These top two values, time delay and randomize, represent time values given in seconds, and the path delay represents a distance value given in meters. Let's look at the time delay first. I'm just going to set, I don't know, how's about 0.5 here and 0. If I come out to frame 50 and I grab my light and I move it somewhere, we can see that the camera starts to trail away from it. Reason why? Well, if we start to drag our timeline like that, we can see that after 1/2 of a second, which at my current frame rate of 24 is 12 frames, the camera stays still. It delays its following by 1/2 a second. There we go, and of course catches up after 1/2 a second. The randomize value is supposed to let us randomize the number of seconds on the time delay. So again, this is like time delay so much plus so much. and that's added at random on an item-to-item basis. Sadly, again, this also seems not to work. That's not too big of an issue. The main reason that we had this way back in earlier versions of Lightwave was to allow for flocking style behaviours, so you could have a single item be followed, and all of the following items would automatically get a slightly different time delay rather than you having to go into the panel for all of them and set it manually. Here, for instance, is something particularly cool that you can do with motion delay in follower. We have a chain of bones. The first bone has animation on it, as we can see there. There's some keyframes, and all of the subsequent bones in the chain have the follower modifier referencing that first bone, and they also have a time delay that goes in 0.1 second increments, so 0.1, 0.2, and so on down the chain. The result of this is that the animation on that first bone gets copied to each subsequent bone, but at a point later in time, and that gives you this whippy, wavy behaviour with only the one item keyframed. You don't have to offset the motion manually. Of course, you can't vary up the amount of delay that's in there, but as a quick, simple solution, it does come in pretty useful. Path delay is somewhat similar to time delay, except rather than lagging behind a certain amount of time, it lags behind a certain amount of distance. As such, you'll find that the camera now always remains 1 meter away from the light. But rather than being, say, 1 meter on the X, Y, or Z as we would enter here, it is 1 meter in terms of the path. Consequently, if I take the light and start moving it in this fashion, we see that the camera follows the same path, always lagging behind a total distance of 1 meter along that path, not distance between the camera and the light. It's distance along the path itself. And with the align to path, we can also get our item to line itself up with the path that is indeed being followed. Very similar to the align to path setting in the main motions panel. And so that is it. That is really follower. As a general constraint, most of the time, of course, now we would use same as item more than we would this. However, because of its ability to operate before or after IK, and as well as its ability to grab the actual world coordinates, it can still be used to perform a good few tricks when rigging.